Now that we've imported our geometry and we moved it into position, the next thing we want to look at is setting up a cam tree. The cam tree is where you do all your machining, so that's how you set up your tool path and ultimately post out your G-code. So what we want to do is come over to the cam tab, which is on the left side of the screen, and that will open up the cam tree. Now, if it's the first time you're programming, you'll create a job from scratch, but after you program some jobs, you can save templates to store the tooling information, the speeds and feeds, the stock, the zero, and other information about that job. That's especially helpful, especially when you're going from cutting MDF at a certain thickness to then a thinner acrylic. Okay, so the geometry is in position. We have our cam tree open. What we want to do is right click on cam defaults and create a new job. Now when we create a new job, it will be based on different job types. So for a CNC router, it's going to be a milling job. And then we want to make sure that we're picking the proper machine. So we'll see the default is the BC3X mill. In this case, we're running an industrial CNC router. So we'll use the arrow down and we'll get to where it says industrial CNC mill. From there, we're going to choose stock wizard. Workpiece is if we have a solid model. We don't, so we're going to skip this step. And then from there, we'll notice that the outside of our shape is picked up by this teal color, and that's actually the stock. It will show us our length and our width here, or our width and our length, however you want to look at that. And then it will also have a value for thickness. So this is where we would type in the thickness of the material that we're working with. The next thing we're going to do is advance. This is for our zero location. Because we've already moved the geometry to zero, we don't need to change anything here. We can go ahead and click OK. And now we've set up a job for the industrial CNC router with a zero on the lower left-hand corner of the stock at the top of the stock. Okay. Once you have a job set up, the next thing you want to do is load machining strategies. So in this case, we're just doing profiling. So one of the things we might want to do is hide the stock. So we're going to just click this eyeball next to the stock, and that will hide the stock geometry. The next thing we want to do is load a machining cycle. So we're going to right click on machine setup, and we're going to come down to mill 2 axis. In the 2-axis wizard, this is where we're going to select our geometry and define the type of cutting routine we're going to do. So for select geometry, we just click select geometry, and then what we want to do is just window in the shapes we want to cut. Now remember, the outside shape is the stock, so we just want to window in all the profiles that we want to cut. Now this is the selected geometry, so if you want to remove it, you can just exit all out and then it will go away. This way, if you made an error with your selection. Also, if you selected, let's over select, let's say I get this outside edge as well. If I want to deselect it, I can just window pick that, just that line, and it will deselect. The default mode for selection is select, deselect. Okay, now that we have our geometry selected, the next thing we'll look at, these are all the number of chains. We're going to jump over that part for now, and we're going to just come down to our depth setting. This is going to be how deep we're going to cut. In our case, we're going to do 750, but then we might want to add an additional amount to make sure that we break through, so we can use plus, and then however much we want to add to the bottom of the job. Once you've entered values in a field, just make sure you tab out of it. Not only will that do the math, it will also make sure the value stays in the field. Okay, so we've selected our geometry and we've defined our depth. We're going to choose OK. Now the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to go to the machining strategy, and this is the operations, or what type of cutting we're going to do. In our example, we have a single tool and we're just going to use the profile rough operation. So we'll select the profile finish and then hit this X to delete that operation, and then we'll choose next on the wizard. Now the idea behind the wizard is you can advance, you can go backwards and forwards using the next and previous button, or you can use the Explorer navigation to jump through to the different areas that you may want to change. So one of the areas we want to change is our tooling information. So we'll go ahead and click on this icon here where it says rough, just below profile rough, and that will get us into the tooling information. This is where you'll change the size of cutter you're using. So in our case, we're going to use a 1/4" end mill. So we'll enter that information there. And then the other place that we can adjust here is our speeds and feeds. Now with this particular machine, we do need a spindle speed in here, but the spindle speed is actually set on the control, but we want to make sure that we have a spindle speed number in here, an RPM, so that the code will turn the spindle on. The next section we have is our cutting feed rate and our plunge feed rate. The cutting feed rate is when we're cutting in the material. The plunge feed rate is when we're going down entering the material. Okay, so in our example, we're going to set this to, let's say, 75 for our cutting feed rate, and we'll set our plunge feed rate at 50. All right, so we've defined our tool and we've defined our feed rate. If we want to change these numbers, we can always come back to the wizard here and edit these numbers. All right. The next thing we want to look at is the pattern. So there's different patterns. For our example, we're going to leave this on a standard. The compensation is left, so that means it will offset when we're cutting clockwise. It will offset to the outside. And really, there's no other settings we need to adjust at this time other than hitting compute. Now when we hit compute, we'll get the green toolpath on the screen. The green toolpath represents where the tool will be cutting, and the purple lines here, these are rapid repositions. So this is when the tool is up and out of the material and moving to a different position. Now you'll notice that it's cutting on the inside of our geometry, and by default it will do that. So we do want to reverse our direction. And so to accomplish that, we're going to come over to the tree here, and below where it says geometry, it will say default chain start point. We're going to right click on that and choose reverse direction. Now that we've reversed that direction, we'll go to the profile rough, right click, and then choose compute, and that will update for the change. So if we zoom back in, we can see all of our green geometry is on the outside of our parts, which is what we're looking for. Okay, so from this point, we've set up a job, we've defined our stock, we've defined our zero, we loaded a cutting routine, we've selected the geometry that we want to cut, we've defined the cutting direction, and we've computed our tool path. Now, prior to posting, it's a good idea to simulate or verify your cutting for where the tool starts and what direction it cuts in. So we can do that two ways. One is to backplot. To backplot, we highlight over the operation, we right click and come down to backplot. This will display the tool geometry. If I zoom in or zoom out, you can see this purple icon here. You can turn the holder and the arbor off, but then it makes the tool kind of small looking. Okay, so sometimes it's helpful to have that on. And from here we can click through and we can see the cutting order, so we know where it's going to start cutting, what direction it's going to cut in, and what order it's going to cut in. Now, this is one version of simulation, and this is called backplot. And again, you can go to the operation, right click, and choose backplot, and then you can advance through the toolpath, seeing what order it's going to cut in, where it starts, and where it ends. The other way you can do this is through a simulation. You'll find that up at the top of the screen here. So if we load simulation up, this will show your material and your tool. So as the tool removes material, it will be displayed in the solid simulation. Now, if you've just loaded your BobCAD software, it will probably have a number of different utilities and tools available, which can tend to clutter up the screen and also confuse you as far as what these may or may not be used for. So to turn those off, okay, you can go to the View tab here, and then you can just click on each of these to hide them. If you want to learn more about them, I recommend you just turn one at a time. But for this type of cutting, it's not likely you'll need to utilize those features. We'll come back to the Simulation tab, we'll slow this down, and we'll press play. And this will allow us to visualize the cut order and the material being removed. Now, if we're happy with our simulation, the last thing that we want to do is to post and save as our code. So this way we can write our G-code program. You can do that from up here. You just hit this arrow down and do post and save as. It will ask for a directory. You give it a name, and then we hit save, and then now you've written your code. If I move this up, this is a preview of the code for our routine. All right, in the next video, we'll talk about changing cutting direction and then also loading our programs into Mach 3.